Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this exclusive live webinar with Barchart. Today we'll be discussing grain sourcing for food companies. I'm Megan Hankins, a marketing associate at Barchart, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Ryan Nelson, senior sales executive, and Kristyn Tarpey, who's a product analyst at Barchart. So thank you, Ryan and Kristyn, for hosting today's webinar.
Thanks for having us.
Ryan and Kristyn are also the hosts of a new podcast called The Food Biz, where they discuss the latest trends, insights, and stories in the food and beverage industry. You can listen to The Food Biz on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you listen to podcasts. So as I briefly mentioned, we will be discussing sourcing grain for food production. Ryan is then going to do an overview of commodity view, and lastly, we'll have a Q&A session. So if you do have any questions, you can fill out on the right-hand side of the screen, you can submit those, and we'll get to them at the end of the session. So Ryan, Kristyn, I just wanted to kick things off by asking you guys, how do you think grain sourcing has evolved in recent years?
Ryan, you want to kick it off?
Sure. Well, I think that grain sourcing has really starting to come alive, and it's really starting to evolve because of some of the things that are going on in the world right now. And the sophisticated companies are still going to be sophisticated, and the less sophisticated companies are going to still be less sophisticated. But because of the tools available, everyone's making that shift right to be, just to move up the chain.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that it's an interesting point too in talking about how some of the more sophisticated companies are just going to keep riding that curve up. Personally, I think that when it comes to technological advances, it's very much so like an exponential curve. So folks that are a little bit farther down the line of that curve, they still have a little bit more ways to go before they can really hit that exponentiation where it's like up so much faster of a rate than it would be before then. And I think that in taking those steps and in seeing these big technology shifts along the way, everybody's going to start to sort of speed up their processes a little bit, regardless of where they're at. But it will still take a little bit more time for those less sophisticated, less technologically savvy companies. I also think that in terms of change, like the way that grain sourcing has changed over recent years, I think that a lot of companies are really aware that their consumers are focused on sustainability. So we've said it before, sustainability is huge. It's on everybody's mind. And I mean, when you see that there's a fire in the middle of the ocean, it sort of has to be, I would say. And I think that a lot of companies are really trying to address the ways that they can sort of make sure that their footprint is ecologically friendly and that their consumers are aware of that they're trying to move in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, sustainability is the new black. I mean, it's very much in vogue to be sustainable now, but how people really achieve that is, another question. And I think that the days of sourcing grain from, just trusting your supplier are over. Now that people are getting more and more, with more and more technology at their fingertips, it's easier for them to just have the tools they need.
And I think that's an interesting tie-in as well, because when people are buying grains or ingredients or whatever it is more locally, they're also reducing that carbon footprint just by cutting down on transmission emissions and transportation emissions. So instead of buying, like if you're in the Midwest, instead of shipping grain from California, it saves a lot of money, and well, it might not save money, but it definitely saves a lot of carbon by sourcing locally. And I think that a lot of consumers also have it in their minds that locally sourced is just better, whether it's a health sort of consideration or whether it's actual sustainability efforts. I do think that consumers are definitely starting to want to buy products that are sourced more locally, and companies need to be able to provide that information.
Well, and thankfully grain is sourced in a lot of grain is grown in the Midwest, so I guess we have it pretty good here in Illinois and Iowa.
I also think that it's an interesting conversation too to talk about sourcing locally when so many industries and so many sectors of business throughout the world today are so global. Globalization has been a huge shift just in the most recent decade, with the internet coming live and making it so much easier. Whereas if sourcing products from global partners definitely has its other challenges as well, because I mean, it's unfortunate that it's still top of mind, but there's still things like disease transmission with COVID-19. And I mean, even beyond that, there's African swine flu that's still at the top of the radar for a lot of people. So globalization alone can prove to be a little bit difficult.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there are some tools that some companies are, implementing, like blockchain. Walmart has been, toying around with that idea about implementing blockchain to start tracking things. So, if a case of salmonella on romaine lettuce does break out again, they know where it's been sourced from and who's been sold to. So
Being able to
that
track
blockchain is a definite, tool that we're going to see developed and utilized more. Obviously, the big drawback is everyone has to be on the same blockchain. So,
right.
Yeah, so do you think COVID-19 has kind of been a driver in sourcing more locally? Or have there been other, seen other impacts that COVID-19 has because of the disruptions in the supply chain?
Yeah, so I mean, COVID-19 has obviously had some pretty major impacts on the supply chain. We've all seen the headlines of farmers needing to dump their milk on the side of the road at the start of the pandemic because the supply chain, it was just rumored that it was broken. While these farmers are dumping milk on the side of the road, we're going to grocery stores and seeing empty shelves. So obviously there's a little bit of a mismatch there. I think that at this point in the pandemic, everybody, it's been what, a year and a half, give or take, even over that at this point. So the supply chain is definitely transferred out of that state of shock. So everybody sort of knows how to manage that a little bit better, but there are still some repercussions that are going on, and it's been such a huge learning experience for so many supply chains around the world.
yeah, I'm going to push back a little bit on that. I think that the supply chain, I mean, while it's getting better, I don't think it's anywhere near being sort of recovered. If we look at, like shipping time and waits, congestion at harbors, I mean, even with like Ningbo still opening back up in China, there's been a huge amount of congestion, and analysts are predicting that, shipping could, these shipping woes could last well into 2022. There's 30, I think I read an article, there was like 32 vessels off the coast of LA. Normally there's 18 to 20. So it's, a big wait time we're seeing. And, when you're carrying sensitive things like food from, other countries and things like that, obviously there's, getting into the port is a necessary thing.
Right, and I mean, even beyond that, though, we're seeing so many labor shortages, again, across different sectors of various industries, but the food and beverage industry is definitely seeing that impact pretty heavily, I would say. Even, I mean, again, it's sort of in the headlines where fast food restaurants and different like laborers along those lines, they're just not, like, they don't want to do those jobs anymore. And at the same time, it's like, if you're making, it's a hard job to do, and people feel like they're underappreciated there. So I can understand that, but even beyond that, in the trucking sector, we were just on a podcast with Jared Flynn from Bulk Loads. He was saying that, the supply and the demand is just off in terms of labor. There aren't enough guys to get these loads out and get the product moved where it needs to be moved. So there's definitely still repercussions and still implications from the COVID-19 pandemic. I did not mean to imply that there wasn't. It certainly still has a long way to go. What I'm suggesting is just that it's not as dire or as shocking as it was beforehand. Now it's more so just dealing with the outcomes from what had happened initially.
Yeah, I mean, there's definite labor shortages, and we're seeing that translating into food prices. When it's costing extra money to ship your products, when it's costing extra money to produce your products, with commodity prices being, near near highs for since 2008, 2012. Those are going to translate into the food prices, and the big question is it going to be transitory inflation, or is it going to be more permanent? And as we see labor prices trickling into the market and companies paying more to pay their workers so they can get their workers there, that's going to be a more permanent thing, and we're going to see it translating into food prices. The FAO just released their July numbers in August, obviously. Year over year, it was 31% higher from 2020 to 2021. I mean, food prices are higher. It's a big chunk of people's disposable income.
Right, and I mean, I think to talk about inflation and about how it does take a longer time to trickle down to consumers. I mean, grocery buying has definitely gotten more expensive even over the past year. It's noticeable at this point, and I think that things are a lot trickier for farmers and producers who are trying to sell their goods because they see that inflation a lot faster because they're so much closer to the beginning of the supply chain. They are the beginning of the supply chain, so they're the ones who are noticing the different costs as well as the different prices that they're seeing for the products that they're making. And these large companies that are buying their grains, that are buying their produce or their products, they are the ones that are sort of dictating the prices that these farmers will get, because there's been a lot of consolidation across agriculture as a whole. So a lot of farmers and producers don't have too many different options of who to sell to. And so they're sort of like, sometimes they can have their hands forced a little bit. Whereas these companies then they can offset a little bit of that inflation for a while until it is eventually passed on to the consumers in the grocery stores, which, you have a lot of choices when you go to grocery stores anyway, but I think across the board at that point, all prices are going to be higher anyway. So it doesn't really make too much of a difference.
Yeah, there's very few inelastic food goods. So if prices start to go up too much, they're just going to be substitutes. I mean, but on a good note, I do, from what I've been reading, what I've been hearing, it seems like we're probably over the hump of the highest prices here in the commodities. I think that when China came in early 2021 and started buying a bunch of grain, people freaked out like, oh, what's going on? Farmers were happy to sell it at those high prices. But I think a lot of food companies were like, uh-oh, what's going on? Is there going to be a shortage? And we're seeing very low stocks levels right now. And I think it was sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy when China started buying, other people started buying and really pushed that price up. I think that we're now over the hump and coming back down, and we've seen the highest corn prices that we're going to see this year.
So do you think there are any ways that food and beverage companies can reduce the cost on them that it takes to source grain?
Well, I mean, they're going to have to be a little bit more sophisticated than relying on their supplier to take care of them, right? So there are things that they can do, using tools like cmdtyView to understand what the prices are, whether it be cash grains or futures, and hedging against that.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely demand forecasting that needs to be as accurate as it can be, and different tools and different methods and things along those lines can certainly aid in helping companies be able to do so effectively.
Yes, we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but are there any other challenges you think that food companies face when sourcing grain?
Well, I mean, sourcing grain, it's the weather trade, right? We look at bad weather, prices are going up. Good weather, prices are going down. We also look at imports and exports. So we got a lot of rain actually in the Midwest here recently, which has sort of pushed some soybean prices down, but then we started exporting. So, that sort of weighed it up and propped up the soybean market. So what we're seeing is weather's pushing stuff down, exports are pushing stuff up. So, it's all a matter of, are we going to start exporting stuff more or less?
And I mean, that's an interesting point too, though, because with more extreme weather events going on as part of climate change, it's interesting because certain areas are going to have different extreme weather events. So obviously the Southwest and the West part of the United States is going through a pretty major drought right now. Conditions are pretty dry, and I mean, it's not particularly exaggerated to say that California is on fire once again. And so these different weather conditions mean that different products or different grains or crops will be able to grow more effectively. And like Ryan is saying, that means that exports are going to go up. But on the other side of that, I mean, it's still going against sustainability efforts, because that does mean that these goods are going to need to be shipped a lot farther than they would be otherwise. Not suggesting that in any given point at like a certain state, even in the best conditions, would be more conducive to growing like certain crops or specific crops that are so much more effective in a different location. But I do think that that's sort of a double-edged sword, because these extreme weather events do make it very difficult to grow certain crops or to be able to sustain those practices, and then just sending them across the country sort of makes things a little bit worse, even because it's all these emissions that are going on that are unavoidable at this point.
Right, the Northern Plains and the Upper Midwest has been crushed by drought, which is our prime wheat. You know, that's primarily grow our wheat. Wheat prices are going to remain high, I think, because of that drought. We're also seeing a creep into Minnesota. I just, saw someone's prediction for corn is going to be, 20 bushels per acre less than what it was last year, because Minnesota has been basically a tinderbox. But thankfully, it's just got some rain. So, hopefully that's going to be, push the crop, a little bit better there. Rain in the Midwest is going to be good for soybeans and corn. So.
Right. And I mean, when I start speaking about climate change, I do think it's important to note that it's not all just on the agriculture industry. Obviously, industries across the world should be doing their part to help stop climate change and help sort of make the entire environment a little bit more sustainable. Agriculture does play a role, certainly, but other sectors do as well that are tied into agriculture, such as the transportation industry, such as other ones aren't coming to my head immediately, but they're all there. It's pretty much anything. So I do think that these efforts should make a difference, and that it's definitely moving in the right direction, just people having conversations around it.
Right, but I also think that, the opposite side of the argument is that when we had our industrial revolution, we polluted and polluted and polluted. And now that other countries that were less developed on the curve behind us are starting to have their industrial revolutions, we're saying to them, no, you can't pollute. So it's a tough, other countries are gonna be like, hey, well, you guys, we're just following your lead, United States. When you were going in the 50s and 60s and 70s polluting galore, now that we're seeing the effects of that come to fruition here with climate change, and we're asking them to not do it, it's sort of tough.
I mean, we had our bout with the Lorax. Maybe we just need to send him over to that over that way.
Yeah.
So do you guys think that shifting consumer trends impact food companies? Are there any trends that you see now that food companies should be made aware of?
Absolutely. I mean, with the new food, the fad diets, the ketos, the paleos, the whatever, we're seeing, a lot more people shifting their, trends to almond flour to be gluten-free and things like that. So, I think food companies do have to pay attention to that, and sort of that's where the clean labeling comes in, and labeling in general. I think consumers are wanting more ingredients that they can pronounce,
I agree, and I definitely think that when talking about anything in the food and beverage industry, it's impossible to avoid the topic of alternative meats or alternative proteins. Those are really huge in the market right now, and it seems like anybody that's a major player in the food and beverage space is starting to invest in their portfolio on that end. And I think it's really interesting because I saw a study recently that suggested that of the people that do buy plant-based proteins or alternative meats, things like that in grocery stores, of that group of people, something like 98% of them still do buy meat. They still do buy like dairy products as well. So it's definitely transitioned away from being such a niche market for vegetarians, for vegans, whatever it is, to being far more mainstream and far more more people are willing to see what those options are, as opposed to just writing them off because, oh, it's like a vegetarian thing, or oh, it's just a vegan thing. That's not really the case anymore. A lot of people are willing to actually give it a try and see if they like it. And I for one fall in that category. I'm not a vegetarian, I'm not a vegan, but I do like plant-based proteins. I switched from dairy milk to almond milk and I like it a lot better. So it's always a good thing to add more variety and more options and choices for your consumers.
I mean, right, like the meat market's a $3 trillion market, and I think alternative proteins make up, 4% of that, but they're projecting by 2025 to be up to like 7% of the meat market. But we're seeing, that trend with companies like Impossible Burger or Beyond Burger adding heme to their mix to make it, make it have the mouth feel of a real burger, have the fat content of a real burger, and things like that. So, I think that they're doing that to sway burger eaters, and whether it's ground beef or ground plant alternatives or whatever. I think they're trying to get that mouth feel so people will come over to them.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, for the folks that are vegetarian or vegan, I do think that a lot of, not like for the majority of that group of people, I wouldn't say most of them are like hankering after something that is exactly like a burger. Like a lot of people that have chosen to be vegetarian or vegan, they aren't necessarily after something that is so similar to a burger because like they miss it. It's more so for the folks who are omnivorous, who are willing to eat both plants and meat, and give people an option of something that they can switch out like one meal with. So for like, if you were gonna have ground beef burgers one night, then you could have plant-based chicken nuggets another night. And it's all about variety and keeping things interesting for everybody.
Yeah, and I mean, it's also, I think there's some sustainability, bring it back to sustainability. There are some sustainability efforts around like cellular-based meats. Now, they're growing fish, obviously fish in a sort of a using fish cells to grow it in a petri dish, and have like fish and chicken with just the parts that you're going to eat, the thighs, the breasts and things like that. So I just read an article that General Mills is partnering or has a stake in a Renegade Creamery, which is a animal-free dairy cheese. So they're using dairy proteins and using fermenting technology to create cheeses without having to milk a cow.
And I do think that brings up another really good point about just how much investment the space is seeing right now. So many of these startup companies are seeing these enormous numbers of dollars rolling in from investors, because obviously, again, it's where the industry is headed, and it's worth investing in to make these options taste good, to make them sustainable. And I think that a lot of investors are definitely seeing the value in that, and seeing that that's where things are headed and that's what consumers are after, and they want to get in on that, which makes sense because, again, it's sort of starting to prove true. And I know plant-based meats have been around for a really long time, but lately it seems like their growth has just exponentiated, like we were talking about earlier with technology. You ride that curve, and then all of a sudden it shoots right on up, and I think we're, again, right at that sort of tipping point.
Yeah, I think 2020 had $3.1 billion of investment into the alternative protein space.
I mean, that's huge. That's an insane number for something that used to be so niche, that's now coming to consumers everywhere.
Right, I agree that it's becoming more mainstream. You can get Impossible Burgers at Jewel, and
right,
they're right next to the regular burgers now. So
right.
Do you guys have any
like some special aisle?
Do you guys have any predictions on which food in the alternative food space will see the most growth in the next couple of years? Do you think it'll be meat, seafood, dairy?
I think once the FDA passes the regulation on cellulose-based meats, I think that that's going to be the next trend.
I would agree.
Because,
I would think it would be something with meat specifically. Ryan, go ahead.
yeah, I just think that, you know, people are going to want meat still. I mean, it's, you know, a $1 trillion market, and if they can grow it without having to, you know, have the land, have the, you know, water consumption, things like that, I think that's going to be a bigger deal.
And it was, even to take it a little bit further than that, I remember that there was an article published recently where a company was working to recreate specific cuts of meat. So a company was trying to recreate a specific steak, which has never been really accomplished before. I think it's been tried before, but this company just received a huge new investment, like we were saying earlier, that they're putting to making whole cuts of meat. And if they can pull that off with like the marbling and the fat content and everything like that, that's going to be really huge for the entire alternative meat, alternative protein space as a whole, I think, because anybody who's not paying attention to it now will probably be willing to give it a little bit more thought at that point, because it's moving from ground meat products or dairy or things like that to a specific, like a steak that's made out of plants. That's, again, sort of unheard of.
Right, just like meaty, just got a huge investment to have mycelium-based whole cut meats. So.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, thank you guys for providing your insights on that. I think this is a great place to wrap up the first part of the webinar. So Ryan, I can hand things over to you for a demo of cmdtyView and some more information about commodity data.
Yeah, sure. So just, I guess, maybe pass me the ball and I'll get started. All right. Pardon my technical difficulties here. Which screen do you guys see? That's the.
Oh, you have it on the PowerPoint right now.
Yeah, it's not presenting though.
Can you re-share that with me, Megan?
So change the presenter back to you. Oh, I think you're good.
Change it. Oh. What can you see? All right, show my screen. Monitor one. So can you see a PowerPoint?
Yep, you're good now.
Perfect, perfect. So obviously just have a PowerPoint here, but what I want to show you is with cmdtyView, we're constantly adding data to our, plethora of data that we already have. We recently just went live with Jacobson. I'm in Denver right now at the Jacobson conference to kick off our, our sort of going live with Jacobson data in here, so we can add that to this. But I mean, whether if you're looking for futures or fundamentals or cash data or some of our partners like the Jacobson or Mintech or Urnerberry or some of our other partners, we have one of the largest, data lakes, if you will, of data. And it's also, cmdtyView is the new standard here, whether you're looking for global data or the ability to trade grains within cmdtyView. cmdtyView is a completely web-based program, so it's going to be better than some of your other install programs because you can take it anywhere, right? It's going to take a burden off the IT. It's going to allow you to, seamlessly transition from, all right, I'm on a Mac or I'm on a PC or I'm on an iPad or my phone. It's all going to be the same for you. And once you build something, it's going to stay the same. So, as far as cash prices, we have a ton of cash prices. We just added Brazil. So if you're looking for cash prices in Brazil, whether it's Mato Grosso or, wherever down there, we have all those cash prices. Plus we have the fundamental data from CEPA. So a ton of that. We have our geospatial data, so our drought monitors and things like that. So if you're looking for weather data, we got that for you as well. And then we have our own proprietary forecasts. So we're gonna offer our take on the yields and have indexes and things like that. I think that our corn index was within a percentage point of the USDA's final number last year. Don't quote me on that. I could be wrong, but I'm not sure. But we had it, 3.5 months before the USDA. So right now we have our own forecasts as well. So if you wanted, it says thank you for joining. I'm not over yet, but if you do want a trial or a demo, feel free to reach out to me, and I can definitely set you up with a trial and a demo of that. But I think the real proof in the pudding is jumping into Commodity View. So when you log into Commodity View, you're going to be taken to basically your dashboard. Can you see this is on my dashboard? Is that what you see?
No, we see the outline. There you go.
All right, so you're taken to your dashboard here. It's going to be set up. You can have as many tabs across the bottom as you'd like. I have just a bunch of tabs here. I'm in the ag market overview, and then within those tabs, you get to set it up and fully customize it to however you'd like here as well. So whether you're looking at grains, livestock, dairy, energy, soft, things like that, you'll definitely be able to see what you want to see and set it up as you want to see it. We try to make it as user-friendly as possible. So we do that with a lot of linking. So as you see, this is linked green, and everywhere else that's green link is going to then, I'll just make that green as well. Everywhere that's you're gonna see that green link, it's gonna link. So as we see here, we're on corn's gonna come up, corn forward curve, corn spread matrix, things like that. So we try to make it easy for you by linking things for you so you don't have to go crazy. You can always make things bigger by just clicking on the maximize function and looking at the chart as well. We have a ton of studies, I think we have 80 plus studies, where they're looking at Bollinger Bands or MACD or moving average and things like that. So we have a pretty advanced charting system as well. I do want to point out we do have a lot of partnerships with like Mercaris and things like that. If you're looking for more organic grain and things like that, or if you're looking for more traditional meat and things like that, we do have our whole partnerships. If we come down to our cash prices and look at our commodity pricing network, whether you're looking for Urner Berry or Mintech or Mercaris, we have a ton of partnerships within the program already built out for you. So I mean, unless we have any questions, I think that's a pretty good overview of the platform.
Yeah, I think we do have a couple, general questions, so we can get into those if you're ready.
Sure.
Okay, thank you for the demo. The first question that we have here is, how important do you think it is for food companies to show transparency in their supply chain?
I think it is. I think it is important. I think that people want to know where their food is being sourced, but the supply chain maybe not so much. Like, do they care if BSNF or CN, is the rail provider for their grain? Probably not. But I think people want to know where their food's coming from.
Also, I want to go ahead and apologize. I think my audio might be on a little bit of a lag right now. I am working from home, and I do believe that somebody else is on my Wi-Fi right now, so apologies if that is the case. That being said, I would agree that, an overarching understanding or an overarching map of the food supply chain is a good thing, and I think that most consumers would just want to know where their food is from, not necessarily all of the steps it took to get there, and not necessarily all of the specifics. But if I get a bunch of bananas from Walmart one day, it would be kind of cool to know where they were from. And I think it's just a nice thing to have in place. I'm not sure that consumer demand is like strictly there yet, but it is an interesting feature to offer your consumers.
Very cool. So the next question is, where can I sign up for a trial of cmdtyView? So Ryan, I know you mentioned this, but if you just want to reiterate.
Yeah, feel free to reach out to me. Let me see if I can pull up that slide. I probably can't do it without going crazy. Let me just pull over this slide here. Yeah, so if you want to reach out to me, here's my email and my telephone number. Feel free to give me a call, shoot me a text. Tell me I'm not good at demoing. I don't care. Just shoot me a email, and I'd be happy to set you up with a trial and give you a demo, a full-on demo.
Great. And then another question, what other topics have you discussed on the Food Biz podcast?
Yeah, so
we've
we've talked about different dietary habits. So we had our CSO Keith Peterson on. He was talking a little bit about paleo and what that means to him, which was really interesting conversation. I also briefly mentioned that we had on Jared Flynn from Bulk Loads, talking about all things supply chain and transportation of food and bev. We have some time scheduled with Erner Berry coming up soon, SCB coming up soon. So we really, like any facet that we can tie back to the food and beverage industry, Ryan and I are more than happy to talk about, and we like to keep it pretty diverse, and you know, we want to try and talk about new things every week. So again, if anybody has any suggestions or anything that they would like to hear about, we would love to hear from you on that as well. But it's been interesting so far. It's definitely been a good learning experience, and I'm excited to see what other topics we have to talk about next.
Yeah, I think my favorite episode was Helter Seltzer, about the hard seltzer market.
That was a fun one. That was a good one.
Great. Yeah, and just as a reminder, you can subscribe to the Food Biz on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you listen to podcasts. So the final question that we have time for today is, can you give a real-world example of a food company using cmdtyView or commodity data to source grain more strategically?
Yeah, I mean, so for instance, I'm not going to mention any names, but what companies can do is understand where they're buying. So say they're buying their corn from Tate and Lyle, they can go into cmdtyView and look at Tate and Lyle's bids and see what they're buying their cash prices for corn, and understand the processing fee and build out all of their should cost models in Excel. So.
Great. Okay. I think that's the last question that we have time for today. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us. If you'd like to hear more insights on the food and beverage industry from Kristyn and Ryan, make sure you subscribe to the Food Biz podcast. And if you're interested in learning more about the solutions available from Commodity, you can contact Ryan or visit our website at barchart.com/commodity. Commodity spelled CMDTY. You can take a look at all the different solutions we have available for food and beverage professionals. So with that, I'd just like to say thank you again, Ryan and Kristyn, for hosting, and we hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you, everybody.